Good morning. It is Friday, the 6th of February. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your daily dose of European news and analysis, live here, of course, on Euronews. Coming up, all eyes are on Oman, where high-stakes talks are beginning between Iran and the United States amid ongoing tensions over Iran's nuclear programme and the government's crackdown on protesters. Ahead of the talks, which nearly didn't happen, the White House says President Trump wants a deal that ensures, quote, zero nuclear capability. But if that doesn't happen, he has many other options at his disposal. Trump has even threatened a massive armada if the Iranians don't come to the table. For the latest, let's turn to Euronews correspondent Shona Murray, who's following the talks very closely for us. Good morning, Shona.
Good morning, Maeve.
So look, what should we expect from these talks, and what exactly is at stake today?
Well, I mean, what's at stake is really destabilisation of the whole region, which is a massive thing. We're talking about what Trump is saying to the Iranians, saying there's going to be a massive armada, that the Ayatollah, the supreme leader of Iran, should be worried. We don't know exactly what the Americans are trying to extract from the Iranians. Now, you mentioned there, obviously, the end to nuclear capabilities, which is something that they may give into, because we saw from Operation Midnight Hammer last year that there was a huge destruction of their capabilities. But we also heard from Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, yesterday, saying that he wants them to end their ballistic missile program and their sponsorship of terrorist regimes. The Europeans would like to see them end their drone program, which of course supports the Russians in Ukraine. So will they give in to all these concessions? Will they have to allow the United States into the Iranian oil market? Now, the regime itself, as we know, is very weak. The economy is really in free fall. Inflation is very high. The currency is very, very low at the moment. There's been decades of economic mismanagement, deep systemic corruption, and then we saw those massive protests in Iran over the last few weeks, where we know at least 6,000 people were killed by the regime, but up to around 17 to 20,000 could potentially have been killed. So that's why we're actually at this table right now. So there was also a discussion over the last few weeks about regime change, and I caught up with Ehud Olmert, who's the former Israeli Prime Minister, and we know Israel has obviously had major confrontations with Iran over the past few years and also in the last few months. And I asked him whether he was optimistic or how he felt about these talks in general.
Don't underestimate the Iranians. They are smart, they are cunning, they are manipulative, and they are playing a game. I don't think that any negotiations will change it. So with all the respect that I have for President Trump and his threats, I don't think that even a massive American attack will change the regime. At the end, it will be changed from within by the people of Iran.
Ehud Olmert there with a very clear message for Donald Trump. And Shona, we heard as well during the week regional powers putting a lot of pressure on President Trump not to attack, calling for dialogue.
That's right. I mean, that's why we have this dialogue right now. And over the past few weeks, when Donald Trump has been sabre-rattling the Iranians, regional powers, where even the Saudi Arabians have been saying, please do not engage in any airstrikes. We don't need any further destabilisation. We heard from people like Anwar Gargash, who's an advisor to the president of the UAE during the week, saying that the Iranians should use this opportunity to rebuild their economy, rebuild their relationship with the United States. We heard the same from the Lebanese Prime Minister, who said that Lebanon won't support Iran in this regard. So hope that there will be no further destabilisation, but we don't know if that's going to happen. Remember, last time Iran and the United States were engaged in diplomatic talks, that's when the Americans struck Iran last year. So we'll see what happens, but it won't be ended in just one day.
It will not. Deeply complicated and deeply complex. Shona Murray, thank you so much for keeping across that story for us. And from one deal to another, you might have heard the last nuclear arms control agreement between the United States and Russia has reached its expiry date, though 11th hour talks are reportedly working to prolong it. The two sides are looking at a brand new START treaty, which would limit the size of nuclear arsenals and ensure inspections. For more, Sasha Vacalini now joins me in the studio. Sasha, tell us, why has this not been renewed yet? Bring us up to speed.
Now, this is the very first time in over 50 years, half a century, when the US and Russia do not have any legally binding agreement limiting their nuclear forces. Now, let that settle in, that thought. This is hugely important now. At the same time, we have to say that the US and Russia, they do have 90% of all of the nuclear weapons in the world. This is the scale of the situation we are now talking about. Now, the latest one actually expired in 2021, but there was an automatic extension till until February 2026. And the sides were kind of mentioning the possibility of extending it, but not yet. Now, both have certain demands. And at the same time, what we've heard from Moscow ever since specifically its full-scale invasion of Ukraine is numerous threats to use its nuclear weapons, both against Ukraine and against the West. Moscow also actually changed its nuclear doctrine, making it easier to go into nuclear weapons. This time, this is what Dmitry Peskov, the press person of the Kremlin, had to say regarding the possible extension. He said that we view this negatively, the expiration, and express our regret. Our initiative to maintain the nuclear arms control limits for another year, even after the treaty expires, has also remained unanswered. Now, it did not really remain unanswered, Maeve. The United States and the Donald Trump administration responded to that, except they do have certain demands. Now, let's take a listen to the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio.
The president's been clear in the past that in order to have true arms control in the 21st century, it's impossible to do something that doesn't include China because of their vast and rapidly growing stockpile.
China's nuclear forces are not at all on the same scale as those of the US and Russia, and thus, China will not participate in nuclear disarmament negotiations at the current stage. Russia has suggested that the two sides continue to observe the core limits of the treaty. China calls for the US to respond positively, handle follow-up arrangements of the treaty in a responsible manner, and resume strategic stability dialogue with Russia at an early date.
Indeed, China has around 600 warheads, Maeve. This compares to over 5,000 that the US and Russia have each of those countries. And yet, China's been growing massively, adding over 100 warheads each year to its nuclear arsenal. So there are reasons for concern there, and this is the strategy from the United States.
Indeed, reasons for concern, Sasha. And where does that leave the nuclear arms race then?
Well, this race has been on already for a while. Both the United States, Russia and China, as we just discussed now, they've been investing heavily in modernizing their nuclear arsenal. Now, the difference here is that Russia's been more vocal about it. Now, in November 24 and then in January 26, Russia actually used its conventional version of Oreshnik intermediate-range ballistic missile and also tested what it called the Doomsday's weapon, the Poseidon nuclear-powered and possibly nuclear-carrying drone, publicly speaking about it to the world.
OK, Sasha Vaklina, thank you so much for that update. And actually, just yesterday, we saw the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warning that the risk of a nuclear weapon being used is the highest in decades. But now, coming up, we will be joined by Ben Hodges, the retired US Army Lieutenant General and former Commanding General of US Army Europe. He's a well-known commentator on international affairs and defence issues. So we're thrilled to have him this morning with us on Europe Today. Good morning, Ben. Great to see you again. Thanks for coming on.
Well, Maeve, thank you for having me back.
Look, given these talks that we're all focused on today in Oman, the recent US force build-up and Trump's, of course, comments that the Supreme Leader should be very worried, what do you expect to come out of today?
Unfortunately, nothing of real significance. I mean, I agree completely with what former Prime Minister Omar just said on your show. The Iranians are playing the game. They see that the U.S. president really does not want to do anything, and also that the Americans have not thought through what comes after a potential strike. I mean, we're good at the strike part, but we're not very good traditionally at figuring out what comes after that. And I don't think we know enough and don't have a plan for who would replace the regime or what would come in after it. And so I am honestly a bit skeptical. And I have to say, I'm also very unhappy that the president inspired protesters to come out in the street and take over their institutions, and he encouraged people to come out, and then we did zero. So no telling how many thousands of Iranians were killed on the false hope that the U.S. was about to intervene.
So you're very pessimistic about today. Do you think these talks, though, could be de-escalatory or a final warning perhaps before Trump's military action?
Well, maybe a final warning might be part of it. But even if it is a final warning, unless we know what comes next, I don't know that this is a very good idea. Now, certainly the United States and probably some regional allies have built up a lot of capability in the region, but it seems that most of our allies actually are pushing hard against any kind of a strike because obviously they would suffer from some of the Iranian retaliation. And so we're really feeling it now. The United States, even with all of its capability, if you don't have a lot of allies with you to do certain things, it reduces the amount of pressure you can put on adversaries.
And our viewers are probably thinking this morning as well, is the world even ready or able for another war?
Well, I will tell you this, the president and his administration have not prepared the American people for another war. I mean, he campaigned on no never-ending wars, you know, and in fact, the idea of going into Iran with troops would be in my view, would be a disaster. I mean, you're talking about a very large country, and for what purpose? It's just not clear that that they have thought this all the way through, in my view.
And as you heard earlier from Sasha Vakalina on set, there's talks between the Americans and the Russians on a nuclear deal. Do you agree with the statement of Antonio Guterres, what he said yesterday, that the risk now of a nuclear weapon being used is the highest it's been in decades?
I think that there's always a risk, but I think it's extremely unlikely because the Russians do not would benefit nothing from using a nuclear weapon. So I don't think it's the highest. I don't know that those kinds of comparisons are useful. The fact is, once again, if all of our allies were with us, putting pressure on Russia, then I think we'd have a better chance of getting back to an agreement.
And just on Ukraine, we saw Ukraine and Russia concluding those talks in Abu Dhabi yesterday. Ben, no breakthrough, though, towards ending Europe's most deadly conflict since the Second World War. Do you think they'll ever be able to break this impasse?
I don't think so, for two reasons. Number one, the Russians have not changed a bit any of their maximalist demands. I mean, they absolutely are not backing away from anything that they wanted 4 years ago. And on the American side, the administration has never cared about the origin of the conflict. They have only been interested in getting a deal of some sort. And I think that they look at this as a gigantic real estate transaction, you know, that like blocks of apartments in Manhattan versus parts of a sovereign country.
And that's why Brussels is worried too. Just briefly, this idea of an EU envoy to talk to Putin, is that a good idea?
Well, I think Europe has allowed itself to be sidelined, thinking that somehow the Americans were going to handle it. And it's clear to me that the American approach has been doomed from the beginning. But the American side has no respect for Europe. The Russians have no respect for Europe. So the Europeans have to get their own seat at the table, even if they have to make their own table.
OK. Ben Hodges, thank you so much for joining us once again here on Europe Today. Well, now, moving on to another major story that we're watching this week, and it's about social media. Brussels has come out in defence of Spain and a number of other EU countries planning to tighten control over digital platforms. Speaking in Dubai earlier this week, Pedro Sánchez said he would be banning social media usage for under 16s. For more, David Artiles from our Madrid office sent us this update.
Good morning from Madrid. As Pedro Sánchez announced, Spain is set to ban social media for everyone under 16. Sánchez has labelled the digital world as a failed state, vowing to rescue minors from a digital Wild West, where he says crimes go unpunished. The plan is bold. The Spanish government will mandate strict age verification and hold tech executives criminally liable for illegal content. They even aim to outlaw the manipulation of algorithms on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. The backlash was instant. Telegram's Pavel Durov warned of total control on the internet, while Elon Musk branded our prime minister as a tyrant. Sánchez, however, is unfazed, dismissing the barking of the tech giants as proof that Spain is on the right track.
That was David Artiles there reporting from Madrid for us. And now for the view from the European Parliament, we can actually bring in MEP Alexander Geese from the Green Party. Good morning, Alexander. Lovely to have you with us. Look, this social media ban for under 16s, it's gaining momentum in many EU countries, but we're seeing a huge backlash from big tech. What is your view here?
Good morning, and thanks for having me. I think the social media ban for minors is a last resort solution. I'm not a fan in the beginning, but I think it has gone so far, the hate and the violence, the illegal content that is pushed to our kids, that our kids do not choose, but that people like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk choose to give to our kids, that a last resort solution should be something that we need to consider.
And we're seeing now many EU countries contemplating bringing in their own legislation. Could we then not kind of see a patchwork across the 27?
That is indeed a huge problem. And we did approve the Digital Services Act in the European Union in the past years to avoid exactly that problem. The issue with the Digital Services Act is that for the very large online platforms, such likes of X or the Instagram or TikTok, the European Commission is responsible for enforcement. And the European Commission has not been enforcing this piece of legislation robustly enough. There are consistent threats from the US administration against the European Commission not to enforce that piece of legislation, not to protect our citizens, not to protect our kids. And I think this attitude has to change. The European Commission has to do something against the toxic algorithms, against the hate and the violence, and it needs to protect our kids.
And that's why many in the Parliament want to move on with this ban, this social media ban for under 16s. But the big question, of course, is how do you verify the age of a digital user? Is it even feasible?
Well, it is feasible, but we do not have a technical solution yet that allows to identify a user, or better, to just verify the age of the user without using or ID or biometric data. Therefore, we need to develop that solution very quickly, and I'm hearing it's coming in the next month, where you can only disclose that single trait, so being over 16 or under 16, 18, over or under 18, because I would very strongly advise against using or ID or biometric data, because that biometric data can be used to train AI, and we have seen on Grok how relentlessly that data is used for intimate images, for
Alexandra
example.
Griesa, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, though, for joining us this Friday morning. And it is indeed Friday the 6th of February, which means after months of prep and going way over budget, the Winter Olympics get underway today in Milan Cortina. Among the VIPs there invited are the US Vice President J.D. Vance and the French President Emmanuel Macron. Jakob Yanis has more.
Today, the Winter Olympics return to Europe. The snow cannons are ready, but nature was faster, covering the Italian slopes in the real thing. And the International Olympic Committee promises the emotions will be just as real. So who will be the winner? Early data showed Americans drive over a third of foreign spending, and the bills are huge. Australians average over €2,500 per booking, while the Dutch pay over 1,300. And what about the Italians? Because tickets are quite pricey, it looks like many of them are staying home. But maybe it is easier to watch from the sofa. These are the most dispersed Olympics in history, spreading over 22,000 square kilometers. So if you want to see skiing after skating, get yourself ready for a 5-hour drive. And the organizers promise these games will be green. So let's cross fingers for that and hope it doesn't end like Sochi 2014 Winter Games in Russia. And that ended with illegal waste dumps in the national parks and a massive price tag fueled by corruption. However, we won't see their flag this time, as Russia is banned because of its invasion of Ukraine. And what about the locals? In a recent survey, the majority of them foresee a positive regional impact and lasting improvements to infrastructure and transport. And if they are right, the lasting prize won't be the skiing, but a region finally connected for good. Let's just hope that during this Olympics, the only ice locals have to deal with is the one on the mountains.
Jakob Yanis there. And if you are watching the games from your sofa this weekend, enjoy. And if you're watching us this morning from the UK, Ireland, Portugal or Morocco, where serious rainfall has seen many evacuated from their home, please stay safe and stay dry. But this brings this edition of Europe Today to an end. Thank you so much for your company. Take care and see you very soon here on Euronews.